Hey everybody, Chris here from It's Mead Made, and we are right in the middle of painting the Gen 9 Pokemon starters. So I've already painted Quaxly, the water type Pokemon, and I'll put that video right up there for you. And today I am going to be painting the grass type Pokemon Sprigatito. So I got this model and the other two from a Patreon I follow, My Pokeprints. Very talented artist, and I'll go ahead and put a link in the description. So let's go ahead, jump to the table, and start on Sprigatito. Alright, so I've got Sprigatito all off of the resin printer, taking all the supports off, and I do have a little bit of pitting, so I'm going to have to be using some sandpaper here. And what I'm sanding it with is some 220. And once I'm done with the 220 grit, then I'm going to move down to the 320 grit. And along the way, I did notice that there was some resin clumping in certain areas that I didn't clean good enough before I cured it, so I had to take an X-Acto knife and kind of scrape that away. One important fact that I did not mention, that when sanding resin, make sure you're wearing a respirator because you do not want to breathe this stuff in. Sanding this stuff does get messy and it does get dusty. So once I think I'm done with the sanding, I take a wet paper towel and wipe the model down really well and get all of the dust off. And when you do this, you definitely see any imperfections left, and that's when you kind of go back and start fixing on some of those other areas again, because the dust can get in the way of being able to see what your results actually are. Next up is gluing it, and what I'm using is this Super Glue Micro Precise Gel. I've actually started using this, and I'm actually a huge fan of it to putting together resin prints. So it actually comes apart, and this is actually another pack that I had, and you just kind of screw it in, and then it opens and breaks that seal. There isn't as much as the other one that I use with the brush nozzle in this, but it is really good. Really, any Gorilla Glue I fully support. Then I put some plastic putty around the edge, put on my super glue, and squeeze it together. Then once it's together, I just kind of wipe it away, all the excess of the plastic putty, and I realized a Q-tip couldn't get in there, so I went ahead and just used a brush, and it worked out just perfect. And after it dried, this is the results. Sprigatito. It's a super cool model, and I think this is going to be a pretty fun paint job. Now straight to the paint booth so I can get the primer down, and as always I'm using my surface primer from Vallejo. I love this stuff because I can pour it directly into the pot and start spraying away. Once that was all dry, it's time for the main base color, which is the very, very light green. I actually pre-mixed my own and added some Vallejo airbrush thinner so I can pour it directly into the ink pot while I'm painting. So now that I have Sprigatito's base color, I am just going to go over the colors I'm using for this project. So what I have is Pistachio from Folk Art and Titanium White from Folk Art. Actually, everything's from Folk Art except for this one. And I took a bottle and I squirted some Titanium White in here and then put a little bit of Pistachio in, and then added some airbrush thinner and some water and then just shook it up, and then I had a pre-mixed paint for my airbrush and I just used this to squirt it in. So that's what I did for the skin or the fur. Then I'm going to be using this Army Painter's Jungle Green, and that is for the front of the face, like the leaf part, because it matches it pretty well. Then what I'm going to be using is, I've got this darker, I think this is it. Yeah, so I'm going to be using this Vintage Tea Rose, and that is going to be the top of the eyes and the dark part of the mouth. Then I'm going to be using this Plantation Rose for probably the tongue and nose. And then lastly, this Ballet Pink, I'm going to be using it for the bottom gradation of the eyes. Alright, I'm going to be using some of my paint palette, and then also I'm going to be using my Army Painter wet palette for some of the other things here. So here we go. So I'm going to be starting with the eyes first, and that is because I might be getting it outside the lines, and then I can paint over the green, paint over the color with the green. And I'm using this Vintage Tea Rose, and the one thing I'm going to do, since I'm going to be doing a wet blend to get that gradient, I'm going to be adding some Airbrush Flow Improver. And Airbrush Flow Improver, what it does is, it is one of those things that it thins your paint, but it doesn't actually break down the paint pigments. So I'm just going to mix that up real good. Also, Flow Improver will actually help keep your paints wetter longer. It kind of slows down the drying process a little bit. So when you're doing a wet blend, that helps because you need to keep your paints wet. Alright, I gotta get my handy dandy glasses. That way I can actually see close up here. And here we go. Alright, so there's my first gradation eye. Let's see if I can match it. So now I'm going to go ahead and start in on the green. So I'm going to bring over my wet palette. So now I'm going to use this jungle green and squirt a little bit on my wet palette here, probably over here in the corner. And I think I might start down here first. Alright, so now that I actually have that green dried, I'm looking at it and I realize I don't like it. So it doesn't match the image enough. I am actually going to switch to another green, and this happens. I thought about just switching and not actually talking about this, but I think it's important to realize that sometimes you go down a path, and when you're not happy with it, jump back and start over again. So I'm actually going to be using this Americana Irish moss now. I'm going to take it over to my paint tray and water it down a bit and start using it. And I'm just going to go right over top of this and see if I'm happy with this. And if I am, great. If I'm not, we'll figure it out. It doesn't matter how long you've been doing this either. So I kind of wanted to just say that and show this. If you're new to painting 3D prints, I just don't want you to get discouraged if you start painting something and you just don't like it. It happens to me too. So I'm going to go ahead and start painting with this, and let's look at it and see what it looks like. Okay, so now I have that repainted with this Irish moss from Americana, and I love it. I think that is the exact color I was going for. It might not match the picture exactly, but I feel like it's a lot closer. So now I'm going to go ahead and move on to the ears because I feel like that's a lot of surface and I want to make sure that I get them. Alright, so I'm going to use this original Vintage Tea Rose for the inside of the mouth, and then this Plantation Rose for the tongue. Okay, drop of water, throw the cat. Okay, now the titanium white for the teeth and eyes. And drop of water. Oh. And be sure to not dip in pink when you're using white. That's a pro tip right there. Alright, so I'm going to be using just some apple barrel black for the irises. Okay, so now I have to paint those little highlights the titanium white. Okay, so the last thing I have to do to finish up this little guy is I am going to put the gloss varnish from the Army Painter on all over the eyes, and that'll give it a nice gloss look, like real eyes. I could have used gloss paints and I wouldn't have had to use this, but when I did my wet blend and stuff like that, I just decided to use all matte paints, and I'll just go over it with this. So here we go. Alright, so I'm going to let that dry, and Sprigatito is done. This Pokemon is adorable, and I think it turned out fantastic. I am very happy with it. The colors I'm pretty happy with, and I guess jumping back to that, even though we hit a few roadblocks, I just want to kind of beat this into your head. Is that the right thing to say? Yeah, I'm going to beat this into your head. It's okay if you're not perfect. You can make mistakes. Worst case scenario, guess what? With what we do, you just print it again and start over. Mistakes happen, and just keep moving forward. One of my favorite quotes is from Thomas Edison when somebody asked him about his 1,000 failures to make a light bulb. And he said, "I didn't fail 1,000 times. I figured out 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb." So think of your 3D prints as your light bulbs. So don't be afraid to mess up. I know I do. You saw. But I don't let it discourage me, and I just keep moving forward. Every single failure is a learning opportunity, and that's all you've got to look at it as. What did I learn from this? I just hope that gives you some encouragement on any project you may be working on. So let's just go ahead and jump to the turntable and see some nice close-ups of Sprigatito. If you like what you've seen today, please feel free to hit the subscribe button. That way you don't miss any of the videos that I produce every week, all focused around 3D printing and painting 3D prints. Other than that, I wish you all a great day.